So, Nate, I want to start with your comments you want to talk about. James Franklin speaking about Deion Barnes. Here's what he had to say.
The other thing is a little bit like that was in that video is although Deion is a letterman and although the players and former players felt strongly about me hiring Deion, ultimately I had to hire the right person. And, you know, if that ended up being Deion, then great. It's a win on a lot of different levels. But I needed to make sure of that. And throughout that process, it just became more and more obvious that this was the right thing to do. The players need to understand, and I know Deion addressed this with him yesterday, like this is not going to be the same Deion. As much as he thinks he's going to be and as much as they think he's going to be, you know, when you're in a complimentary role compared to, you know, running the show and running the room, there's a transition that happens. And, you know, it's going to be fun and it's going to be exciting. And I also think we all got to play a part in that as well in supporting, you know, Deion in that room through this transition. And that would be for whoever we hired.
So, Nate, I want to come to you here. Your thoughts. What struck you about this comment that you wanted to talk about?
It's probably fairly self-explanatory and maybe a little obvious, but Deion's 30 years old. Like, that's young. He's a young guy. I mean, not that I've been doing this forever, but in the span of years that I've been covering Penn State football, I mean, it really was not that long ago that Deion was one of the guys that I was covering pretty closely in his time at Penn State. So
Deion and I were in college together. Like we were there at the same time. So yeah.
But it's not about age though. It's about experience. Like that's the thing. You've got guys coaching, being head coaches in the NFL and in their 30s. Like this is not a situation where you're looking at that. Now he took the roundabout way, played in the NFL, of course. I think played in one of the iterations of the Pro Football League. So he took a little bit more time playing football. Got into it through the high school and then got into a grad school. I think there's legitimate, you know, like concern. Like coaches always want the experienced guy, even if it's, you know, maybe not the right guy that the fans want. Like they always want that experience because that experience brings with them different practices, different methods of how to get the best out of players. And Deion's experience right now is all at Penn State, and it's all 3 years of being a grad assistant, which he alluded to in the second part. You can be a buddy as a grad assistant. You can be a mentor. You can be all those things. And you can be a mentor as a coach. Don't get me wrong, but I think it's different being a grad assistant than being a position coach because the grad assistant isn't the one making the final say on a lot of things. And the position coach is.
You have to be the bad guy in a lot of situations.
He's going to have to be the bad guy eventually. And that's, you know, how do the guys that were, you know, pining for him to get the job, how do they handle that? And those are questions that we can't answer until probably fall camp, to be honest with you. So I think those are the concerns. Now, tremendous upside. Like you can talk out of both sides of your mouth here because of the tremendous upside of him being 30 years old, him obviously being a rising star. If James Franklin didn't hire him right now, he might not get that chance to hire him. And, you know, we've seen guys that have gone on to big success when that, you know, when they don't fit that timeline. So it's okay to be apprehensive, not so much about the age, but about the experience. That's just my opinion.
Let's get on to our next question or our next comment here. And we are traveling all the way to the far-flung land from defensive line coach to defensive tackles.
We are never going to chase size for size sake. That's where Leanne, our nutritionist, and that's where Chuck Losey, the strength coach, all of our weights are based on body composition. So if you got a guy who's naturally a high body fat guy, we're not going to ask him to put on weight because he's most likely naturally just going to put on more body fat. And we have a range really for every position based on not only our college experience, but also if you look at the NFL draft, what those numbers are. So we got a pretty good range of, are you in an acceptable range where you should be? And if you're on the low end, then you should be able to carry more weight. And we'd obviously always want it to be lean mass. If you're carrying lean mass, it should actually make you more athletic. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to gain weight and reduce body fat at the same time, which is easier said than done. That's also why we're really putting the emphasis on doing it in the off season, because we don't want to be messing with it during the season. And that's where if you can gain a pound every week or a pound every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks and just gradually put it on the right way throughout the season, that's what we want. But no, it's not chasing size for the sake of size.
Now, there's a ton of different ways, and there's a lot of stuff in there that we can go with. But I guess the first thing is, in reading between the lines, he also said at a different point, I think we can get more effort from our defensive tackles. I think there's another level of what we can get from them. And if you look at those comments of what he said, gain a pound a week, gain a pound a week, gain a pound a week, and then you go and you look at the roster and you look at guys losing weight and being on the low end of that spectrum, I think you can clearly see what this frustration of wanting to be bigger is about, because it's not about being 300 pounds. And this is where I think it's important for fans to understand. It's not about putting as much weight on as possible. It's about putting as much good weight on as possible. And Penn State may still be undersized for the defensive tackle position with the guys on the roster, but right now it doesn't seem like they're maximizing their size potential. Fitz, is that a fair way to read what he was saying there?
I look at the bodies in there, and I don't see anybody that's like on par with PJ in terms of a guy that can put all that weight on, because right now you've got a bunch of 3 techniques across the board, basically.
Yep.
And that varies from Zane Durant to, I guess the biggest one would be Caleb Artis, but Caleb Artis is not ready to go yet. So, I mean, he's just a bigger body. So I don't know that. I think there's probably too much focus on the weight, especially in March. You know, this is the bodies fluctuate. That's what they do. And it's not important to have the weight on right now. The problem, and I know it's been pointed out here in the chat, is not the problem, but the Hakeem Beamon is such a ridiculous outlier at 256, I think it is right now. Yep. You can't explain that one. Like that is so tough to explain, because he's been up and down, mostly down. He does this every year. We talk about this every year. I've tried to stop explaining it because I don't know like the genesis of why he needs to be 260 pounds. Can he not carry it? I mean, you look back, Ryan Buchholz got up to 270, 275, something like that. He had back issues because of it. I don't know if that's a situation that Beamon's dealing with, but it's not a situation where he's cutting weight specifically to play defensive end. I know it's been speculated in the past. That's not how it works. So I can't explain it, but I can probably try and pinpoint what it's not, and that's what it's not. So I think we're taking too much from the getting bigger conversation after the Michigan. I think there's a lot that goes into that. It's not simply just taking guys that are 315 pounds and putting them in there.
Ultimately, it comes back to recruiting, right? Because you said there's guys with the body type of 300-pound big guy in the middle that doesn't have the athleticism, and this is the rub. A guy that is naturally going to run around athletically at 300+ pounds. Those guys are hard to find. So how do you maximize? And this is where he mentioned it again. I wish we were a little bit bigger, but he didn't harp on that during his comments earlier. And when I asked him about his philosophy of how to gain that size, you know, it to me, we call what it is. You mentioned that Beamon is an outlier here of maximizing your size, maximizing the healthy amount of size you can put on your frame. And then he goes on to talk about Aaron Donald and how everyone wants to be lean and fast in Aaron Donald. And this is, I got to imagine this is more than one player over time. This has been something that's been building up over time. Nate, you're shaking your head about that.
Yeah, no, it's like, there are very clearly, and he's not going to name them specifically, but there are clearly examples of guys that they've had specific weight plan paths for, blueprints for, that have gone in a different direction on their own accord. Right? Like through his, I mean, that's what's happening is this is just shade throwing from without naming names. It's just like, hey, well, you know, everybody's convinced. I mean, this is not the first time that these comments like have happened, right? Yeah, they happened at Michigan last year, but there were other comments in prior seasons of players that were going through similar situations. And it's, you know, like, can I sit here and give great insight into exactly who and exactly when? No, but part of that conversation is always on the end of, oh, they're like, it's a resentment, I think, of players listening to voices outside of the building more than they're listening to the voices inside the building. And that's, if you're a head coach, or if you're a strength coach, or if you're a nutritionist or whatever, if you're any of those people, very clearly you have a deep resentment of that. And I think that in college football coaching, that is one of the hardest things to do. It is, I mean, I will say this just because basketball is on my brain right now, but it is way easier to deal with 16 players and their families and their handlers and their trainers than it is 125.